So I've actually painted this one before. And so this is what we're going to do. And so one thing about painting beaches in particular, I think, is we go to the beach and the beach is so beautiful and we all want to paint the beach, right? And then you do a painting of the beach and you're like, this is super boring. I don't understand. The beach is beautiful. Why is this boring? So I think there's a couple, I mean, I'm sure there's a million ways to paint a beach, but I want to just show you my thoughts about a couple of them. And one is, if you're looking straight out at the water, it's helpful to have something in the foreground that kind of frames it or just gives you a close-up look. So in this case, obviously it's these palm trees and flowers, but you can imagine how it could also be like a beach umbrella and a person sitting under a beach umbrella. But having a foreground element, I think, helps if you're going to do a beach scene where you're just looking straight out. But the other way that I like to do beaches, I'm just going to show you something else from my sketchbook, is to look down the beach at something else. Like there's a little bit of land right here. So there's still some palm trees in the foreground because it's always good to have something in the foreground. And you get beautiful beach, but you get this sense of depth and that there's something out here that you could walk over. You could go there, you could walk there. And here's a more involved one, but it's really the same idea, right? You're not looking out at the sea, you're looking towards the land. So you've got this beautiful bit of land and you've got something in the foreground. It's palm trees again, but it could be beach umbrellas or, a little restaurant on the beach. It could be something other than palm trees. So you've got kind of foreground and middle ground and background, but there's something that you're looking towards. So those are ways that I like to do a beach and make it interesting. And the trick with this one is I'm going to be demonstrating this one in watercolor, but I love doing these in gouache. But the trick in watercolor is going to be getting some light along the side of the tree here. So leaving a little bit of white. Now, if I was doing this in gouache, I wouldn't be so worried about it because I could put down some white gouache. I also have a white paint pen that I could use but I'm going to try to not watercolor over that and leave a little bit of white area there so I can get the brightest lights. Okay. The other thing I'll just mention is near the end, I was going to use some mixed media. So I've got some acrylic paint pens that can be fun to use. And I just got out a bunch of markers. A gray is nice for shadows, and I have a bunch of browns and oranges. And then I just also have a bunch of greens and yellows. So I just grabbed all of these because sometimes you can get a nice, fine little wonderful tip with a marker that's harder to do with paint. And also I do have a brown colored pencil that I'm going to use for these little lines on the tree trunk, because I think the pencil has more texture, and so it has a rough kind of organic tree sort of vibe to it. So I'm going to reach for those things later. And I have the picture here as well. Hold on. So I've got the picture on my iPad. You're not going to really see that on camera, but I'm going to have it next to me. And I'm going to draw this picture kind of dark, but you don't have to draw it so dark. I have a 5x7 area drawn out here. And I'm going to draw it pretty dark, like I said, so you can see it. And I'm not going to draw very much of it, but you should draw it light. And if you have maybe you have a water soluble colored pencil and you want that's maybe light blue, for instance, so that it's doesn't wash into the blue of the sky and the blue of the water and make a lot of weird mixed muddled colors. You could use that. So normally I would keep this very light, but I want you to see it. So I'm just going to try to get the big shapes in, and I'm not even worried about getting it wrong exactly, because I'm going to come in and paint, and the paint is what really matters. So I'm just trying to kind of get a sense generally of where everything is. So I've got a palm tree there, and over here, I'm not too concerned with drawing every one of these elements really, because I can do this with watercolor, but I'll just go ahead and put a few things in just as a way of kind of thinking out loud about it. But you know, you might not even feel the need to do this much in pencil. And so there's some little, you know, there's kind of just some shapes here. Like that's all I really need to see. I do want to remind myself that there's this green grass over here, and there's a little bit of kind of green grass and shadow there. And there's some shrubby green things here. I just want to get a general sense of where they are. And then the palm trees, the cool thing about palm trees is that they've got all this stuff that happens, you know, up here, whether it's actual coconuts or whether it's just all this weird kind of vegetation. It gets very thick, and there's all this really interesting texture. I'm not too concerned about even exactly what that is. Now, like I say, I'm going to go ahead and draw each of these, but if I were you, you might not even need to draw every single one of these, because we're just about to do it in paint, and maybe that's enough. So this is optional. What I'm doing right now, I'm doing just to demonstrate, but maybe you don't even want to have this much pencil, because in my case, the pencil's definitely going to show through because I've put dark lines, and it might be prettier to just hold off and just do it in watercolor. I don't know. I also don't really object to being able to see the pencil, because I feel like you're seeing the artist's hand at work, and there's something lovely about just seeing every stage of an artist's process, even if it's a little bit sketchy and preliminary. So like that's a lot right there. Now there's a shadow in the foreground right here. I'm a little on the fence about whether I want this or not, so I'm going to sketch it in very lightly, but I might not do it. There's some shadows being cast this way, like this is the shadow side of everything. So there are some shadows down here I want to remember, but the most important thing I want to remember is this business of like, leave some white. So I'm actually going to draw it pretty dark, so that hopefully I'll remember to leave some white. We'll see if I actually do. But again, I'm drawing this darker than I normally would, so you can see like that this is me telling myself, leave all this white. Okay. So that's it. That's all I would do for the drawing. So now I'm going to get into painting. And let me go back and just show you which one would be the best example of this. Hang on. I don't know how well this will show up, but this is very turquoisey, so there's a lot of green in the water, and the sky is more blue. I like these being two different colors, even if they were to look kind of similar to you in real life. In this case, there's a very light, more blue sky, and there's more green in the water, and it's pretty dark right out there at the horizon. And that happens a lot with the beach, is that it's dark at the horizon, which is weird because we think of things getting lighter as they move towards the horizon. But in this case, the water's getting deeper, right? Like the water's really shallow right here, and the sand is so white. So that's why. So how I'm going to handle this is I always do the sky first, because my water is clean and my palette is relatively clean. And so I can get good clear sky, and I don't worry about it getting muddy. And I'm going to go ahead and just wet the paper ahead of time. This is basically a clear sky. There's a few little clouds towards the horizon, and I'm not interested in those clouds, so I'm going to ignore them. So I got the whole thing wet. Now I do have to remember about my white areas. I should have left those dry probably, but whatever, I didn't. but I will remember not to get too close to them. And so I'm going to take cobalt as my blue and just start up here and just work it down. I want it to be really light. This is a very light, bright sky. And I've got all these other colors that I'm going to want to have in front of that sky. So I don't want the sky to be so dark that I can't manage it. I am succeeding in remembering to leave some white areas, which is a miracle. You could go ahead and let the sky go right in over the trunk if you wanted. It's no big deal, but you could also just leave the whole trunk area white so that you've got, you know for sure that you've got that bright light. But that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to, I don't need this sky to be anything more than just that. I might put a little bit more, but that's plenty. So, okay, so that's the sky. Now, I did not draw a horizon line for the water because I really don't want a line right there. It feels very unnatural to me. So I'm going to just let this dry, and I'm going to come in and put the horizon line for the water in, even though there's no pencil line there. But I think we can all see about where it goes. And it's not so important that it goes exactly where it is in the photo. It just needs to be there somewhere. So now I'm going to do the sand. And for the sand, I'm going to use Naples Yellow. If you have buff titanium, that would be good too. If you don't have either of those, then maybe it's a very light wash of something like yellow ochre or raw sienna. Those would be my suggestions. So I'm going to come in here, and this can be very light, very pale. You really want this sense of sunlight hitting everything. And again, this can go over everything because we can paint on top of it. There's no need to worry about what it would be like to come in and paint on top of it. So now we've got the sand down and we've got the sky. And I'm looking at, I'm in Portland and it's super rainy here right now. So it's damp. So watercolor's taken a very long time to dry. So I'm just going to be thoughtful about this. But when I put in, I'm touching the paper. First, I'm looking at the paper to make sure it's not shiny. And then I'm touching it to make sure it doesn't feel cool to the touch. Because if it's cool to the touch, then it's ever so slightly still wet. And mine is a little bit still cool to the touch. But my ocean color is going to be a turquoise. So you might have phthalo turquoise or cobalt teal, or even a blue that you mix a very bright green into, like a phthalo green or a hooker's green or something like that, just to push it a little towards green. I think I'm ready to take my chances on this being dry. And I kind of like coming in on top of the sky color because there is sky color in the ocean, right? Because obviously it's reflecting the ocean. So I'm going to put it right here. I'm just kind of going slowly and carefully and sort of looking and thinking about not messing with my little white area. This is one place where I want to be kind of careful and particular. But I'm going to be putting plants right in on top of it, so I'm not concerned about painting right over the plants. And then I'm just bringing plain water down, or not plain water, but water that's coming out of my jar that has a little bit of paint still in it. Let's see, I think there's a little water in there. I mean, I would just leave it like this. I would not overwork this. There's a lot going on in the photograph, but I don't feel like we need to get that particular because the focus is mostly going to be on the trees. And that's where we need to spend most of our time too. So, get this down and forget about it. If I wanted to be more exactly like the photograph, I might take some Prussian blue, which is a mixture of blue and green, or it's a blue that leans towards green. And I might mix it with the turquoise. And I guess I could come in, especially while it's wet, and maybe let some of that just sort of wash down a little bit, but it's not really super necessary. Anyway, that's really all I would do because I really want to focus on all this cool stuff that's in the foreground. So for the cool stuff that's in the foreground, I'm going to be using these little paintbrushes quite a lot. These are the kinds that you can put water inside, and I don't really put water in them, but I just like these little sharp points, and they're not super expensive, so I don't feel bad when I have to get rid of them. But I have a bigger one and a smaller one with kind of a fine point, so I almost feel like I'm drawing with them. So that's why I like them. And I think I'll go ahead and my sky isn't totally dry up here. So I'm going to go ahead and do the trunks of the trees first. No, I really want to do the sky. I'm going to go ahead and do the sky. Do the palm fronds and then do the browns later. And the reason for that is that I want some good, clean, bright colors for my greens. And once I get in and start messing around with browns, everything's going to get a little muddy on my palette. So I'm going to start with the greens, and I'm going to use a lot of sap green. Awesome. Wonderful color. I'm probably going to mix some Prussian blue into it to get really dark colors. And then there's also some areas that are light yellow. So I'm just going to take some Hansa Yellow and get some very light, bright colors. So it's going to be kind of a range like that. I think I'll go ahead and start with the lightest. I'm going to go ahead and start with the Hansa Yellow. So I'm just going to look for like, where do I see the most yellow? And, be really just free and loose here. I mean, it's palm trees. Everybody's going to recognize that it's a palm tree. And I'm not going to be too worried about drawing on top of my pencil drawing exactly. Like I said, I mostly did this dark pencil drawing for you guys to be able to see, but it isn't how I'd normally work. I'd normally just, I would just jump right in and start doing it without the pencil because it's pretty obvious what it is. If you get a good, thick, rich mixture of this yellow, it goes right on top of the blue. That's what I like about it. I mean, it looks a little more green, but kind of just goes right on top. So, and also you can put down a lot of yellow and then come put green on top of it. So if you put down more yellow than you need, it's no problem. But I'm just looking for where I see most of the yellow in the photograph. And then also I'm mindful of the fact that I have these cool markers and that I might want to do some of this in marker. So I'm not going to even do everything in paint because the markers are thin and well-defined, and you can kind of get some cool, fun effects with the markers. So I'll do some of that too. And as long as I'm into this yellow, if everything else is dry, everything feels reasonably dry to me. So I'm going to just go in and try to kind of suggest some leafy shapes down here. It doesn't have to exactly match what's in the picture. You're just sort of representing this idea that there's foliage down here. So don't get too worked up over making it match exactly. It doesn't have to. And where do I see yellow over on this side? I see it here, maybe. Some of these palms have like a yellow stem and then the leaves are green, which looks cool. And the other thing that I like about palms is that they kind of turn brown and decay. So you get these kind of brown, yellow, ochre colors all the time in palm trees. So I like the way that looks. So that's kind of a lot of yellow, which I really like. And so, oh, and also, hang on. I think this little plant, whatever this is, it has some yellow too. Okay. I also see some little pink flowers over to the right, and I want to be sure and remember to leave some room for pink flowers because that tiny little bit of pink I think would be sort of great. Oh, and I also see some yellow here on the grass, so I will lay that down, knowing that I can put some green on top of it, maybe over here too. It already looks kind of cool. Okay, so now I'm going to just go from the yellow to, I think I'm just going to go straight into a super dark green because there's not really a lot of in between. And I'm also, again, I'm thinking about how much I want to use these markers as well. So I'm going to do a little of this, but then I'm going to switch over and do some in marker and you can sort of see the difference. One thing about a palm tree is that, so like these fronds are pretty narrow, but they're solid up by the top. So sometimes with a palm tree, there's solid areas and it helps to kind of represent that. So again, you don't have to do every little bit of it with paint. You can leave some out and know that you want to come back and do it with markers or pencils if you're into that. Part of the reason I'm just doing a super dark green, this mixture of sap green and Prussian blue, is that it's going to mix with the yellow. So, and look lighter, and also it's going to dry lighter. That's the thing about watercolor. It gets lighter as it dries. And it's backlit, you know, against the bright sky. So I feel like there's room for it to be extra dark. You guys feel free to ask questions if you want. I'm just going to sit here and keep talking to myself, which is sort of what I do when I paint anyway. It's just that this time you're here. So let's see. I'll do some of this one as well. Also, sometimes this stem in the center is sort of more of a brown or a yellow ochre. So there's also the possibility of coming in with the color we're going to use in our tree trunk for some of these. I think this looks kind of sweet already. I'm going to save this top area and totally do that with markers. So this is all pretty dry. So this like feels very incomplete to me, and that's because I want to do mixed media. Now I might as well just look down here around the bottom, like what do I want to do in terms of this foliage? And it doesn't need much. I'm going to sort of make individual leaf shapes, so it's a little bit more of like an illustrator's style, where I'm really representing individual leaf shapes instead of just like masses of green that form the illusion of leaves. I'm actually going to just draw little leaves in, I think. And then over here, again, I'm just going to lay in these little individual leaves. I might, with the marker, draw a stem to sort of connect some of them. That could be fun. But I'm going to also leave that kind of incomplete, play around with it more in a minute. And sticking with the very dark green, you could also use, I have Daniel Smith neutral tint, which is basically like a black that you can mix in and make it even darker. Sandy's saying permanent marker. Yeah, I have some permanent markers, and I also have some water soluble markers like Tombows. I just grabbed them all because It's going to be the last thing I do, so it doesn't matter so much whether it's water soluble or not water soluble. Either one I think would be fine. So I'm mindful over here that I really want that pink, probably more pink, like I'm going to exaggerate the pink. And I want darker areas down here, but still with this suggestion of individual leaves rather than just a big clump of dark, I think. And then for this little palm down here, some of it's lighter. So I'm going to go back. I might even get some, this is a phthalo green, like phthalo green or hooker's green. If you've taken my class on greens, you know that I call this like a fake green. It's like a stoplight or a stoplight green, or it feels artificial, but you really do see it some in the plant world. And I think this is a good example of that.
Amy, your green class, this is Katie, the green class was the first watercolor class I ever took. It's what set me off on my complete obsession and spending all my money on art supplies.
Oh, that's funny. That's kind of a weird first class because it is about a very specific thing, but it's also about how to paint a little garden scene. So it makes sense.
I got a lot of good stuff. The windows, the black windows.
I
think it's a good one.
The black windows. Yeah, that's right. I always use black ink in windows, and I think it looks very realistic. It's a good little trick.
So, everyone's always like, how did I do that? And I'm like, I just took Amy's classes. I did whatever she told me. So I'll let you go.
I like that. Okay, so let's see what else. I can suggest a little bit of green grass down here. You could, if you wanted, actually draw a little, I don't know, somewhat grassy shapes, but I don't know that that's necessary. I think I'm just gonna do a sense of green. And of course, I'll be putting shadows on top of all that. So more to come from markers in a minute. And you could do the little pink flowers with markers as well. If you have a pink marker, I don't really have a good pink marker. So I'm going to take some quinacridone rose and just sort of drop in just some little hints of pink over here. It's nice to have that different color because it doesn't show up anywhere else. So I sort of like having it. It doesn't really look like anything, but again, more to come with drawing. And so now for the trees, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to first get some yellow ochre. Well, first I'm going to clean my palette off a little bit. And I'm going to start with yellow ochre. Or if you don't have yellow ochre, maybe you have like a raw sienna kind of color. But that would sort of qualify as the lighter color here. And it also works for some of this like kind of dried vegetation stuff that happens up at the top of palm trees. So being mindful to leave my little white area that I have committed to preserving. I'm going to do a darker layer, but that's my first layer. And then here too, I can make it darker, but that's my first layer. Ooh, I like the way this looks. And then this one also. All right, so those have to dry. So that's it. That's it for that for the moment, but I'll go ahead. Yeah, with this same color, good thick mixture, little tiny brush. And I just want to kind of suggest this stuff at the top of the tree. That's the technical term, this stuff. There's some of that stuff here, and it's actually quite a bit darker, but this is going to be like a first layer of it. And then there's also places where there is kind of a brown color along the stem there. And I can maybe come in and lay it in on top of that green. You never quite know how that's going to look. And this is another thing that I'd be very tempted to just wait and do with marker. But, you know, if you're actually painting at the beach, you probably don't have a ton of art supplies with you. So maybe you don't have markers with you. So it would make sense to do that now. Where else can I put some yellow ochre? Probably down here. Just work in some earthier colors. Just a little sense of that. Cool. Okay, so I'm still letting that tree trunk dry a little. Now I'm going to take a darker color brown. So I'm going to use transparent red earth, but like a burnt sienna or a burnt umber would be fine. This is pretty red. I think you could add either a little ultramarine to it to make it more brown or a little bit of Daniel Smith neutral tint. We'll push it towards a brown that's more similar to like a burnt umber. A good dark brown, because again, it's going to lighten a little bit when it dries. So I'm not going to start on the trunk yet because I can see that mine is still wet anyway here in Portland. But I'm just going to drop in some darker colors down here. I see a lot of dark. For me, with watercolor, the whole thing is about getting some good dark dramatic values in. It's taking forever to dry. But up here, there's like a lot of little shadows in this area. So if you can just sort of emphasize the undersides of all this kind of dried up vegetation. And this one is super dark because it's all in shadow. So I'm just going to come right in on top of a lot of it there. And even though this is still a little wet, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come down the edge. Yeah, it's okay. I don't want to overdo it because I'm mindful of the fact that I could, if I want more of that trunk to be dark, I can do it later, but I can't take it back, really. So I'm just coming in on the darker side. I mean, this is what makes round objects seem round, is when you get the shadow side and the light side. So that's why I'm so fixated on it. So if I didn't have pencil, I would be, and I'll just do a couple down here just so you can see, I'd be kind of doing these little marks on the trees. And they're sort of a grayish color, so it would be okay to bring in a Payne's gray or something right there too. Okay, that's all drying. I am going to bring in a very light yellow color, so this isn't completely white, the bright sides of these tree trunks, but I'm going to wait. Now I need to think about the shadows. So I'm going to go over here to my sky color and make a purple. You could just take a ultramarine and mix some alizarin and like mix a purpley shadowy color. Maybe you have a purple on your palette. That would certainly be good. I love to mix a shadow that is made up of other colors that I've already been painting with. And I want it to be pretty purple because to me, it's like, this is a party. This is a beach scene. It should look cool and fun, but I'm dipping over into a little of this brown to knock it back just a bit. But I would say go pretty purple, like, you know, go crazy. Let's just see what it looks like. Whenever I'm doing shadows like this, I'm always like, let's just try a little area over here and see. Like that actually looks a little too light to me. So I'm going to dip into my shadow violet, which will just darken it up quickly and easily. Maybe I'll grab a little more ultramarine. I just need a thicker, I just don't have a rich enough mixture yet. There. it's mixing with the paint below it. So you take a purple and you drop it on top of a green, and it's going to mix with the green. So that's why I'm not worried about making this shadow green at all, because it's going to mix with that green paint anyway, and it is going to look a little greener. I just want this sense of good, dark, shadowy colors. And you could come in between some of these fronds and just sort of suggest the shadow behind them, but don't get crazy caught up in it. And then over here, same deal. I'm just gonna suggest some of these little blotchy, pretty shadows. And the underside of this tree trunk. Oh, that's so nice. And the underside of this. I'm actually going to right now bring this right up the side of this tree trunk because I think it looks so good. And I'm going to bring it up this tree trunk too. That looks good. There's not as much shadow on this tree because the light from the sand is bouncing up off of it, but I am going to exaggerate the sense of shadow on it because I like it. I like that drama. I'm going to exaggerate the shadow on this one too. I'm always amazed. I love it when people, artists that I love on Instagram, I love it when they post the photo or the scene that they're working from or the place they're sitting, and whatever they're looking at is so boring, but they've really super exaggerated what's interesting about it. And you're like, oh, right, I can take a kind of flat thing and make it pop. All right, here I go across the beach. This to me is so important because this is the palm tree casting a shadow. And even though you don't see a perfect reflection of the fronds, you do get this little sense of shadow being cast. So this is where the question is, do we want to do this shadow in the foreground or not? And I'm still on the fence about it, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it just for kicks. I'll tell you what I don't like about it is that I can't see the thing that is casting the shadow. And I have this thing about, I like to draw shadows where I can see what is casting the shadow because it's a relationship that I can kind of understand. And in this case, the tree that's casting this shadow is not in the picture, so it's a little disorienting. So I would not necessarily always do a shadow like this. I'm just putting it in for fun. I'm going to make it a little browner. I think it's a little too purple. Anyway, I'm just going to leave it like that. And so then the last thing I wanted to do with watercolor was just the tiniest bit of bright of a yellow color on where the whites of the tree trunk are. So I'm going to use the same Naples yellow from the beach. If you don't have this, you might have something like New Gamboge, which is a beautiful golden kind of yellow color, which I think is gorgeous for sunlight. But I want this to be so light, like I want a very watery mixture. I don't want too much here. And I'm going to start out up here and make sure that it's not too much. I just barely want to tint the paper. Oh yeah, that looks good. You probably can't even see it. It's just like the tiniest bit of color. So the tree trunk isn't stark white. And so now I'm going to go ahead and get out some markers. And these are just markers that I kind of just already had. So I can't say that they're the best ones or the exact right colors. I literally just reach in a drawer and pull them out. But I do like that there's a fine tip, and I'm just going to play around and see what happens if I come in and do these sort of finer lines with the marker. I think it looks cool. And one of the things about palm trees too is there's always two sides to the fronds. So be sure that you kind of represent the other side of that leaf, if that makes sense. Don't get too carried away. Don't do the exact same thing everywhere. I'm gonna switch over to a different color in just a minute because I don't want it to look too samey. I'm actually gonna, let me see. I'm gonna test that yellow first because I've learned the hard way that some of these are more orange than I want them to be. This is kind of an orangey yellow. Let me just see what it looks like to put some of this down. That looks kind of cool. It just adds a lot of color. Like it's a beach, so let's make it fun. As long as I have this cool orangey color out, I'm just going to bring a little bit of it down in here too. And maybe I'll put some down here. I always like, as you can tell, I always like if I have a color out to ask myself, where else can I put this color? Because I think it unifies everything. So that's cool. And then this is a lighter green. Maybe I'll try it up here. I'm really trying to use the point and get very fine lines because some of my watercolor strokes were sort of fat. And so I want real skinny lines just to have variety. But I don't want to get rid of the areas that I just left really yellow. So I'm telling myself to not get too carried away here. I mean, this is already looking kind of fun. And let's see, I'm going to get out some brown markers now. Again, this is all just with a sense of wanting to experiment. I don't quite know, but I love this sense of this kind of stuff up in the palm tree. So I keep coming back to that. I think some of these stems could be darker. That looks cool. Maybe here. I want lots of variety, so I don't want to do the same thing anywhere. Maybe down here, there could be some more little dark, a sense of these plants being super dark down at ground level. That's nice. And I guess oh, well, one more thing. I'm going to get another green out. I had this idea that maybe I would connect some of these little, oops, this is too light. I had this idea that maybe I would connect some of these little leaf shapes by just drawing in some little stems. Just not trying to call too much attention to it. I'm just placing little sense of a stem. This plant's coming from somewhere. I really want people looking at the palm tree, so I don't want these plants to call too much attention to themselves, but just a little bit. That's kind of nice. So I think I'm ready to, this is all dry. So I'm going to come in and see how it works to use a colored pencil here to get this sense of these, lines in the palm trees. And you could absolutely use a marker here as well. To me, there's something about a pencil. It's like what Katie and I were talking about before. It's like it's a different vibe. Like immediately I feel more kind of scribbly as soon as I have a pencil in my hand. It's kind of a different thing. So like right away, I love how that looks. It's way scribblier than anything else in the picture. And I think it's sort of cool to have variety like that. But you could be doing this with a marker as well. Like I could take, here's a brown. In fact, some of these are darker, so I could definitely come in and exaggerate some of them and darken them up as they get towards the shadow side. So, you can go, oh gosh, I kind of like the way this looks. So you can kind of go back and forth. Wow, that's fun. That looks very cool. I'm in my pencil. All right, I'm going to finish up this scribbly scribbly little things on the trunk. Some of you may know that I'm writing a book about trees, so I may have to come up with better terminology than scribbly little things on the trunk and weird dried things at the top. I'm pretty sure there's technical terms for all of this. Okay, this one too, I'm going to do a little bit with marker, but I'm going to also do this charming bit of pencil. So, you know, it's funny, I said at the beginning that I was going to leave the pencil super dark so you could see it, but I normally wouldn't do it. But you know, in fact, you don't so much even notice the pencil once it's all done because there's so much else to look at. I'm kind of wishing, I'm going to take another colored pencil. This is burnt sienna, but sort of a yellow ochre type of colored pencil. I just sort of thought maybe a little texture in here. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I love that, but it feels like it needs, it's so light, you probably can't even see it, but I felt like the sand was too smooth and maybe it just needed a little something. What I could also do is just kind of, I could come in with the pencil and just do some little scribbly, like it's dried grass right here. That's sort of fun. At this point, I'm really, truly just kind of messing around. Like this is basically done, but it's fun to just come in and go, oh, well, what else? If I had a few more minutes, what could I do? If you're actually sitting on the beach, you might not have a full hour to just do one picture, but I kind of hope you do. I want that for all of us. I want us all to have lives where we can just spend an hour on the beach drawing a picture, and that's our life. It's my goal. If anybody has a question or a comment, now would be a good time. I'm really just sort of barely touching things up right now. I'm kind of feeling done with this. I could have done, by the way, these kind of shadow areas. Sometimes you can get them in with a marker. So this is just a gray. It's cold gray is what it's called. And so, you know, another thing you can, this doesn't look great, but I'm just showing you like other options. The cool thing about these markers is that you can do this before you paint as well, and then paint on top of them. So they look really integrated with the rest of the shadow. So that's kind of a cool trick. I don't do it a lot because I tend not to travel with markers, but it can look kind of fun. So I'm just going to go in and paint on top of it just to show you what it looks like. But again, that's more for demonstration. I probably would have just left that off and been happy with it just like that. And I did want to just show you super quick. I didn't use these paint pens, but paint pens are so great. So let me just show you. Just going to shake it up, make sure it's working. You know, like if I wished I had more yellow, like this is acrylic paint, so you can get a ton more stuff happening there. Or like, here's my white one. So if I had not really preserved my white well enough, or if I just wanted to get rid of some of that pencil, it doesn't always give you a super bright white because it tends to mix with what's underneath it, but you can definitely come in and add little bits of white. And I even have a light green one. I don't like this brand as much. Molotow. But cool light green. I can definitely add a little bit.